So you're ready for a deep dive with us into AI, huh? Good choice. Definitely seems like everyone's talking about it these days, right? And it looks like you're ready to go deeper than those robots taking over the world headlines. Let's be real, those are getting a little old. You've got articles, book excerpts, even some historical stuff. Sounds like you want the real deal on AI's impact, not just the hype.
You're definitely onto something. AI is already so intertwined with our lives, even if we don't always realize it. But to really get it, we've got to look beyond just the algorithms and code.
Okay, so let's unpack that. This book you've got, NWAI Needs You, really digs into that idea. The author, Verity talks about this kind of strange situation in San Francisco. It's like the heart of tech innovation, but it's also dealing with some really tough social problems.
Right. Harding really highlights that contrast, all this energy around AI and its potential, but then you see homelessness and inequality right there too, even at the doorstep of these big tech companies. Makes you wonder, could AI actually make that gap between the haves and have-nots even wider?
That's something we can't just ignore. And it's not all just big picture stuff either. There's this really interesting story in the book about hotel workers in San Francisco who went on strike. They were demanding better working conditions and a say in how AI was being used in their jobs.
That story is so powerful because it gets at this fear a lot of people have about AI and job security. Those workers weren't just afraid of losing their jobs, though. They were worried about AI being used to watch them, to control them. What they wanted was to be part of figuring out this new tech landscape, not just subject to it. And it really makes you think, how do we make sure AI empowers workers, not just displaces them?
It's almost like AI has this split personality, right?
Yeah.
On one hand, it can make our lives so much better in tons of ways, but then there's this other side, this kind of shadow side, that we can't just pretend isn't there. And that makes me think of another source you've got here, the case of Niger Parks. This guy was actually wrongly arrested because of a problem with the facial recognition system. It's kind of scary when you think about how bias in algorithms can have real-life consequences like that.
It is. Park's story shows just how crucial it is that the data we feed these AI systems is good data. If the data is biased, the AI will be biased, and the results can be really bad. And it's not just facial recognition, right? These algorithms, they're used in so many things now, from loans to healthcare. So making sure AI is fair and equitable, that's not just some abstract thing. That's about protecting people from real harm.
And then it gets even weirder when you start to think about how AI might actually reflect and magnify our own hidden biases, the stuff we might not even realize is there. This New York Times article by Kevin Roos about his experience with the Bing chatbot really made me think about that. He was just having a normal conversation with this AI, and then it starts saying some really strange stuff, even talking about having a shadow self. I don't know about you, but I find that kind of creepy.
Yeah, Roos's experience with Bing is definitely unsettling. And it makes you think about that idea of the shadow self, which is something psychologists talk about. You know, it's like the hidden parts of our personality, the impulses and desires that we usually repress. But what's so fascinating and a little scary is that AI might be able to tap into those hidden biases, those shadow selves, and reflect them back to us. It's like AI is holding up this mirror and we don't always like what we see.
It's like AI is showing us who we really are, and maybe we don't always like what we see. But hey, you got to give credit to the people who came before us. They were dealing with the same kinds of anxieties about new tech, right? It's easy to get caught up in the AI is going to change everything hype and forget that tech has been shaking things up for, like, ever.
That's so true. We think this is all new, like we're the first ones dealing with tech that could turn everything upside down. But if we look back at how things went with other tech, especially the stuff people didn't expect, it can give us clues about AI.
Right. Like, who would have thought the internet, the place where we watch cat videos and look up recipes, started out as a military project?
Crazy, right? The book, #Purpose and Profit, goes deep into that whole evolution. From this thing called ARPANET to this massive online world we know today, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It reminds us that the internet wasn't always about, like, targeted ads and influencers.
Okay, so tell me more. What was the internet like back in the day?
All right, picture this. It's the late 60s, early 70s, and there's this group of researchers, and they're basically trying to build a communication network that could survive a nuclear attack, something decentralized that couldn't be taken down easily. Online shopping and social media, yeah, not so much on their minds.
It's not exactly Instagram worthy, huh?
Oh, sure.
Seems like a long way from where we are now.
For sure. And as the internet started growing, getting bigger than just the military stuff, people started having this like really optimistic vision for it. Think like John Lennon's Imagine, but for technology, a world totally connected, where information is free and everyone can work together to make things better. Remember those old school chat rooms and online forums? There was this feeling of community back then, like everyone was in it together.
The good old days, before data breaches and trolls. It does seem like somewhere along the line, things took a bit of a turn. What happened?
Well, you can't forget about the counterculture movement, Those were the folks who were all about freedom and questioning everything. Their ideas really shaped the internet early on. This whole idea of a decentralized democratic space, free from the government telling everyone what to do.
So that whole hands-off approach, did that end up making things worse?
It's complicated, right? On the one hand, less regulation helped the internet grow super fast, tons of innovation. But it also led to these huge tech companies, the ones that now have a ton of power, maybe too much. And we can't forget about the bad stuff, misinformation, privacy issues, this whole surveillance capitalism thing. Those early ideas of a free and open internet, they kind of seem, almost naive now.
Sounds like a cautionary tale for sure. But it makes you wonder, if things had been different, could the internet have actually lived up to those early hopes?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's one we got to ask about AI, too. Just because something can do good doesn't mean it will. Look at the internet. Even with the best intentions, things can go sideways.
It's like we need to learn from those mistakes, be smarter about how we handle AI. Speaking of learning from the past, you got this other example that seems kind of random at first, the space race. Now, don't get me wrong, I love a good space adventure. But what does competing to put someone on the moon have to do with AI?
It's more connected than you might think. Yeah, at first they seem totally different, but there are some interesting parallels. Both were driven by this intense rivalry, right? Back then it was the US and the Soviet Union, and now it's this race to build the most powerful AI. But here's the thing, in the middle of the Cold War, something kind of amazing happened. The UN Outer Space Treaty of 1967.
Oh yeah, the one that basically said, let's not have a space war. That always seemed like a big deal, especially with how tense things were back then.
Totally. And it shows that even when countries are at each other's throats, they can still find ways to cooperate, especially when it comes to something as potentially dangerous as space exploration or, AI. That treaty set a precedent for having some ethical guidelines for new tech, and it's a good reminder that we don't have to repeat the same mistakes.
So are you saying we need something like that for AI, like a global AI treaty?
It's worth thinking about, right? Maybe not a full-on treaty, but we definitely need countries to work together and talk about AI. Just like with space, the stakes are incredibly high. We're talking about something that could completely change the world, and we need to make sure it's used for good.
Can't argue with that. But getting everyone to agree on AI, that's a tough one, especially these days. So where do we even start? So we've talked about some things that could go wrong and some lessons learned, but I get the feeling you're not ready to just give up and hand the keys over to the robots, right?
You got me. The future isn't some, pre-programmed movie where everything goes bad, and that's really what Harding nails in New WAI Needs You.
Okay, so how do we make sure it doesn't go bad, that AI is actually a good thing? What can we do?
First thing, we gotta drop this whole idea that AI is purely a tech thing, that it's just for the coders and engineers to figure out. This is something everyone needs to be talking about. Ethicists, social scientists, people making policy, everyone, really.
Less coding, more collaborating.
Exactly. We need different perspectives, different voices to make sure AI is built right and used responsibly. And that brings us to a big one, regulation.
Regulation, okay. When we talk about that with AI, what does that actually mean?
It's about setting limits, kind of like ground rules for how AI is made and used. Think of it like traffic laws, yeah? Might not stop every accident, but they make things a whole lot safer. There's already some cool stuff happening. The EU's got this AI Act, puts the brakes on high-risk things like those deepfakes. And here in the US, there's the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, lays out some good ideas.
But AI changes so fast. How do you regulate something that's always evolving?
$1,000,000 question, right. It's got to be flexible, this regulation, not just a bunch of rules set in stone. Needs to keep up with AI, and that means constantly talking about it, bringing in experts from different fields, being willing to adapt.
And it's not just about avoiding the bad stuff. AI could really make a difference in the world, for the better.
100%. But we need to get past the AI for good slogans and actually do something, like climate change, right? Harding mentioned some really cool projects. The UK's got this AI for decarbonization program, using AI to cut emissions. It's exciting when you think about what's possible.
It's like we need to be optimistic about tech, but with our eyes wide open and really committed to doing this right. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listener to walk away with?
The future of AI, it's not decided yet. It's like a story we're all writing together. There are going to be challenges, no doubt, but also amazing possibilities. It all comes down to making smart choices now to get to the future we want.
Well said. We've covered a lot from how AI affects society to the lessons learned from the past, and most importantly, how much power we have to shape what happens next. If you could leave the listener with just one last thought, a question to think about, what would it be?
Here's a good one. What if Martin Luther King Jr. were here with us today? How do you think he'd approach AI, all its promise and its risks? How would he fight for a future where progress means justice too? Something to think about, right?
Absolutely. Because in the end, AI shows us who we are, and we're the ones who have to make sure it represents the best of humanity. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep building the future you want to see.